All right, thank you for coming to interview with me, Brandi. And I just want to introduce myself as a founder of United Community Change. We're here to increase the efforts for diversity, equity, inclusion. And the topic today is about the Springfield Public School Board race that you're in right now. And what we're going to do is just gather some details about you, your background, what had you running, and then also kind of keen in onto the minority vote and how your vote is going to affect it, or the issues that are actually like in the community right now and what you think about that. I'm going to ask you, to talk to the minorities who are on the fence of voting, or, why should they vote? Does their vote count? And just really kind of educate them on you and, what your position is going forward. All right. So tell me about yourself.
I am a mom. I have 3 kids. I have 2 bio boys and I have a foster son who lives in our home. And our boys are all public school kids. One's in 7th grade, one is in 2nd, and one is in kindergarten. And I work as the executive director for Foster Adopt Connect. We're a resource agency for a 29 county service area. We're headquartered out of Kansas City, but my office is in Springfield. And we have 40 staff who work toward servicing kids in care and the families who help them. And that could be bio, kinship, foster, adoptive. It can look so many ways. But we're here to help those kids that are in care and that are at risk. I was an SPS kid myself. I went to Watkins Elementary. Right at the end of 5th grade, my family moved for my dad. I was born to a 17-year-old mother, and my mom and my dad married when I was 3. My dad adopted me when I was 4. And so I saw my parents grow up, right? Like I'm still growing up and I'm 41 and but I didn't really grow up, right? So I saw them going to college and working and, just trying to make it. And so for my dad's business, he had an opportunity to have a business, but that meant we had to move to do that. And so we moved to a really small town, El Dorado Springs, Missouri, when I was at the end of 5th grade. And so I finished out high school there. I left for college, went down to Nashville, Tennessee, and got my bachelor's from Belmont University. And I had gotten my associates prior to that at Cotty College in Nevada, Missouri, which is an amazing women's college here in the state. But in 2009, I moved home to Springfield from Nashville with my husband and our baby at the time, who's now a 12-year-old. So I just love this community. It's a good sized community to live in and a great place to raise kids. And, this is where I've wanted to be.
So over the years, and I'm glad you talked about like your journey of leaving and coming back. So over the years, how have you seen Springfield as a growing, and what type of changes do you see that you kind of really are connected to?
Yeah. Well, obviously, I was young when I lived here. I just turned 12 when we had moved away from Springfield, but I still visited a lot. My mom's family lives here. So I've seen a lot of change, though. I feel like, economically, we've changed a lot. We've created, during that time, OTC came about. So we've provided more well-rounded opportunities for education for our students to make it more accessible. We've seen a large growth in, even our Springfield public schools. We've seen a growth in the community. I've seen a growth in diversity, and I think that that's really important too. So moving from Nashville with a almost 6-month-old and coming back here, my husband and I were both concerned about what our kids' education would look like. And even the diversity in the educational opportunities was really important to us. Our oldest goes to Central and he's in the scholars program, And that was really important for us, that he would be around kids who weren't like-minded, right? Who didn't have the same background and experience. And so we are fortunate he's in that program at Central, and we want him to continue to go on to high school at Central too. And I know, that's not an opportunity for every single kid, which is part of why I'm running for school board, is, access, right?
Yeah. Because, talk about that as far as diversity and being in this area and making sure that your kid is kind of exposed to diverse opportunities.
Yeah.
Where do you see those opportunities? I know a lot of individuals keen in on Central High School, because it probably gives like the most, the biggest experience there. Plus they have wonderful programs over there at Central. So what type of opportunities do we have to be diverse in this area?
Yeah, so, if you look at our community and you look at like public schools in general, the way that our schools are kind of structured is somewhat neighborhood schools. So a lot of what happens with diversity is it gets squashed, if you will, by the neighborhood school that you're like. There's a bit of segregation in neighborhoods that happens, and so that ends up making our kids very homogenous in what school they go to sometimes. So it just depends on what area of town you live in, where your kids can possibly get that ability to have more diverse opportunities of the folks that they're around, like who they're able to be exposed to, and what perspectives they get to learn. And so that's why it's great when we have schools that are like Central, but again, they're not extremely accessible, and only so many kids get to go to the middle program. But for high school, there's a broader opportunity there. So you do see pockets, especially in the elementary middle school, where there's less diversity because of the school district and that like neighborhood community. So my husband and I, though, are really vocal, or like teach our kids how to be open and accepting, and ask questions, how to like learn from others and listen, most importantly. And for our oldest, he's of course the oldest as far as like being able to read more books and learn things, and then of course have great conversations with kids at school. He's in speech and debate, so he loves to like talk about all sorts of topics and debate people on them, and listen to different perspectives, which I'm very proud that he's gotten there, that he's able to listen and at least hear other people's opinions out, right, before making his own decisions. I think that's really important.
Yeah, well, it's really important considering if you haven't like interacted with an individual, you might have the perception that they have the same background or they have the same thoughts or perspective as you, and until you listen, like you really don't get to find that out.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and like learning their backgrounds too helps you know where they come from and helps you understand interactions with people. I told you I went to Cody College, and that was a very fun and diverse experience for me. I was one of a handful of people from Missouri who went to Cody at the time. And so I had, suite mates that were from all over the place, but I had one from then Yugoslavia. I had one, we knew like there were women who lived in the hall with me who were from Russia or from China. There were folks from all sorts of religious backgrounds and communities it was incredible because, I was able to absorb and celebrate with them and celebrate alongside them, and like really learn to appreciate where, their religions or their beliefs or their world experiences.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you for allowing me to get a little bit more information, about your background, what your kids are involved in, and, especially here in Springfield. So we have some questions. The first question I have here is, why are you running? You kind of touched on this a little bit, but, why are you running for the Board of Education? And if elected, what are going to be your priorities?
So the first reason I kind of got engaged in it was my oldest son. He had a lot of behavioral delays. And so something that happened within the school district that was really cool, that was like, I don't know, eye-opening for us, is we knew when he was 4 that he was different, and he had a lot of behavioral needs that were heightened, and we didn't quite understand everything. So we took him for an evaluation and we ended up getting him into some therapy, and we went through that therapy as well. So we were better equipped as parents on how to help him. And he, with his quasi-diagnosis at that time, he was able to get a 504 plan for his education. And now he has a full diagnosis, and which is ADHD. And at the time, I think there were probably other things going on that we never had a full diagnosis for. So we were, I guess, just really impressed with the school district and how they wrapped around us to support us and support our son. They sat down with the principal, the vice principal, both kindergarten teachers. At one time we met with the counselor of the school to figure out like how to help him be a good student, how to help him not disrupt the classroom, because he was really bright, but he had a lot of behavioral delays that his peers didn't have.
Yeah.
So that was one way. But, you know, to me, there, in some ways right now, there's so much about school districts that are getting politicized, that are getting attacked. And I feel like our public education system is the true test of who we are as a community. So the ability for all of our kids to have access, to have equitable access to education is incredibly important. And we need people to stand up for our kids' education to ensure that they have the future that, you know, that's within their potential, that we don't allow anything to stop every child from having that opportunity. So I kind of have a lot of passion about kind of different areas. I don't have specific like agenda items necessarily, because I know as a board member, I'll be one of 7. And so that means I'll have a vote, I'll have a voice when items come to the table. And I know sometimes I might not, you know, I might be the dissenting voice, or I might not agree completely with what happens. But it's also important that I do bring as much background information. I study, I talk with people in the community to understand the issues, and whatever the topic is, that I know what folks are facing and how decision one way or the other will affect people. And I think that also means like playing well in the sandbox with my fellow board members too, like, you know, getting along and at least listening to them and being an active participant.
Yeah, being a team, which is what this community definitely needs as it grows into what, you know, it looks like it's going to be, which is really diverse in all aspects. So, you know, you touched on your child being having a 504 plan, and I just want to say, you know, I understand that because my child went through the same process, and she also got diagnosed in the same areas, and it's hard, you know, having a child go through that process, and, you know, trying to make sure that you're staying on top of, you know, their education and making sure that they have all the tools that they need. So, you know, I applaud you for stepping up and, you know, trying to make a difference in that way, you know, for your children and all the other children like them.
Thank you.
So what differentiates you from the other candidates and or board members that might be on the school board?
So currently we have one board member who has kids in the district, and I believe that person, their child is about to graduate this year. So I really do, and I've always said this, I feel like we need a parent voice. We need to, obviously board members need to be good listeners anyway. And so hopefully they're taking into account what changes will, you know, how they will impact our families, how they will impact our students every time a decision is made. But I think it's really good to have a parent, right? Like an active parent who can kind of see those things and who can empathize with parents who are coming from all different areas. You know, when the busing changes happened this last year, I had a coworker who is a single mom, and she was, you know, struggling with how am I going to get all my kids to all their different start times how am I going to afford now the requirement of before school care because of the time, and I can't get to work on time if I don't pay for before school, and now that's an extra cost.
And if you have, because I'm a single mother as well, because if you have like multiple children and this child has to go to before care and this one doesn't, then you have to pick up that child and get them to school. It becomes a somewhat of a tight schedule.
Yeah.
if you can even if it's doable at sometimes.
Yeah, so I mean, it puts a lot of burdens on our families, and so I think that something I bring is that perspective, the willingness to listen to our families and not just take my own, oh, it's hard on me. Well, that, that I'm one person out of so many families. So listening to other families and being willing to get feedback from folks to see what it means to them if these changes happen. I run an organization right now. I run a nonprofit. So my husband and I have had this conversation a lot, and being a board member is similar to, and obviously a school district is in and of itself its own kind of beast or type of organization. But I run this nonprofit organization, so I'm constantly trying to balance the budget. I'm working with employees. I have an advisory council. We do have a board at our headquarters in Kansas City. So I'm kind of balancing a lot of the aspects that also come into play with a school district, and being on a board and kind of understanding it from both sides of the table, being the staff person, or I've served on several boards myself. So I kind of have that understanding of what it's like to be at both sides, to receive and to help, provide feedback.
So the community can expect that you have the tools that you need in order to, advocate for them and the parents who are depending on you to make those decisions.
Yes. And I want feedback. I want to hear from everybody. Like, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. Yeah. Sometimes it's questionable if your questions matter, like if your concerns are actually the concerns of the board or the school as a total entity. Because some people, they can become very intimidated with approaching the school about different subjects. As a parent, it's kind of like, yeah, I send my child there and then my hands are tied at that point, until I receive my child back, so that's good to know, that, you want to be open and, accept and consider the voice of others, that are concerned about what's happening with their children. Okay, so let's see. So have you received any donations or endorsements from groups? If so, what groups?
Yeah, my first endorsement was from Teamsters Union 245. And I did get a U.S. donation and endorsement, I think. So I have an endorsement and a gift from them, or donation from them. And then I most recently had two others. The NEA endorsed me and did make a donation to my campaign. And then the MSTA, also Missouri State Teachers Association, also endorsed me. So, and no monetary donation came alongside the MSTA, but it's also so helpful because they're helping to get out the word to educators in the community so that we know they come out on April 5th.
Okay, great. 1 second. Okay, great. So, so now I'm just going to ask you some governance questions, kind of give some insight to the role that you're trying to get, and, kind of educate the ones on the outside that pretty much don't really get involved, with the governance of the board and stuff like that. So like, what is the school board member's role and responsibility, and how does that role differ from the role of the superintendent or the administrator?
Got it. So the role of the board is they have one staff member that they help to hire and supervise, and that is the superintendent. And then their other responsibilities are helping to establish strategic plan, policies and procedures, and budget. So obviously there's a lot involved in those pieces, even though it's like 3 easy bullet points and then the staff person. So what that means is they need to be empowering Dr. Lathan. They need to be providing her the tools that she needs to be at her best, to let her run the school district, to ensure that we're hitting metrics. And of course, they're sort of setting the path in ways with strategic plan, and they're setting it through policy and procedure, which kind of keeps you, held to specific rules or policies. And then giving a budget where, of course, that does restrain you a little bit in times when there's not enough money to do everything you want to do, right? So we need these things, and maybe we're held back because funding isn't sufficient enough for us to make purchases necessary or to hire staffing necessary. So that's really the role. And then the superintendent's role is to run the district. And to have the tools and the resources needed to make the staff changes, to do the hiring, to provide the oversight of the district, to ensure that, our school is operating well. We've got so many moving pieces within a school district. It takes a lot of folks to get a school day underway and finished each day. When you think about buses and environmental services and lunch staffing and paraprofessionals, counselors, nurses, obviously the educators, the administrators. So it takes a lot of folks that she's got that oversight over all of that team, and the board is only supervising that superintendent.
Right. What is your view of Dr. Lathan as a superintendent?
I really like her. And I'm really excited to see her as she has more time to progress within the district. Her entry plan, I was really pleased with as you read through a lot of her goals, some of her observations of our structuring of the school district, even the availability of resources or lack of resources, and ensuring that we're helping under-resourced students, looking at, I know it's achievements, right? Like where our test scores are, and seeing how our under-resourced students, our ESL students, our children who are in the BIPOC community, understanding where if they're falling behind, how do we help our students who are under-resourced? So I liked her plan of, the frequent students who are scoring like D's and F's, and follow-ups, the preparatory work for like ACTs and testing prep, and making that more accessible to our kids, because the top, 5 or 10 or whatever % of kids who are testing well and who have resources are going to continue to test well and are going to continue to have resources. So we have to look at all of our children, and we have to figure out when our kids are falling behind, there's a reason. And we need to be able to understand that reason and then provide resources to come alongside them to help them.
Yeah, and those resources, definitely, I like that, because, having, children who fall behind doesn't reflect that they just don't want to be successful. Right. It's sometimes they just need, maybe they're not grasping it at that time, or they need a different type of instruction, given to them, or extra time even. And sometimes either you do or don't style of teaching, either you pass or you don't, or you get it or you don't, or you just kind of at your own will. Doesn't really help, the students. And so it's really nice to know that, they're given multiple opportunities to try to enhance their education in order to get them where they need to be. Yeah. And obviously, for children with IEP, that's in even more, I guess, serious, I don't know how to say it, like it's more beneficial. It's not more beneficial for them, but it's kind of like pertinent that they have that support and extra something to depend on, because they're already dealing with these issues like layer 1. Yeah. And then that's like a layer 2, so if they're not given that, it's kind of overwhelming.
Yep.
It
is.
What is the best way to address differences of opinion on the board or between the board and the administration?
Okay. So I feel like civil discourse is something that is natural to humankind, right? We won't always agree. There is, especially in a district this large, we will not agree, right? So the idea is pulling back a bit and finding ways to engage with one another in meaningful and thoughtful and in trustworthy ways is really important. And so I think what that means is sometimes just if you hear somebody on a board say something and you're not too sure you agree or you understand where they're coming from, even like, and this is very tactical now, but like using I statements, what I'm hearing is this. Is that what you mean to say? Or, right, like, so clarifying and just taking time, slowing down with one another. I think we all have a similar goal. Everyone sees success in a different way, but we all want to see the district remain strong and get stronger. And to some folks, that means different things. So it's kind of taking it back a little bit and understanding that we all have good intentions and finding ways to talk and disagree in a thoughtful manner.
Yeah, because in the end of the day, we're looking for a solution to a problem, and we're not just there to kind of get what we want,
Right.
It's kind of, going to a dinner table and deciding what's on the menu. That's going to be specifically for you. However, when you're feeding multiple people, the decision's not going to be so direct.
Right.
So,
there will be allergies and intolerances.
Yeah, there's allergies and intolerances. I'm glad you got that. Like, we have to figure a way around it, or figure a way to be inclusive to, those issues. We can't just say, oh, okay, well, you have an allergy, so you're not invited to the party.
Yes.
Sorry. That's just not the way to do things, or it shouldn't be, if we want to include our entire community. Could you support a board decision, and we just kind of went on this, that you did not vote in favor of, and why or why not?
So if I vote for something and I'm not in favor of it, but it passes, or whichever way, if I basically am dissenting to the final vote, I think that it's my duty to continue to move on, because that vote's already been decided. And so I think, it could come up again. It could potentially affect other areas of the district's operation. But in that moment, that unit of 7 folks who voted in whichever way. And if I'm not in favor of that, there's not a lot I can do in that moment. So I think part of it is just accepting and then assessing. I don't think that, there are always opportunities for growth or change, or for a motion to come up again later in another realm that might change the trajectory of the decision that was already made. So I don't think it's necessarily done yet.
Right. I'm glad that you mentioned, I'm glad that you put that out there like that. Like, there will be opportunities to try to create change in other ways. If the decision is made amongst several people, and in order to kind of meet the expectations and the deadlines that you need to meet, you kind of have to move on. You have to kind of be acceptable to, what everyone has decided, or what has been decided at that moment. But to not shut down and think that that's the end, and I'm just saying that, and I'm just saying that to clarify that that's what you're
Yes.
saying.
Yeah. Progress takes time. And sometimes it doesn't happen the first time that, a vote comes up. And I think too, sometimes within a few months, perception or there's clarification or clarity, right? And so things can start to make a little bit more sense to other voters. And so I think that it's not, you know, I watching the board in the last couple of years, you know, I've seen those moments where certain things haven't necessarily happened the way that folks expect. And then sometimes some of those topics do come back around. And then there's a different consensus around it. And I think sometimes that's when, you know, some factors have changed, or you know, it's a different, you know, same group even in the time that I've seen some of these topics that haven't quite gone the same way each time. So
yeah, because like whenever you jump, I mean, just sticking with the basis of our mission, you know, diversity, equity, inclusion, you don't know until you're in it. And so once you jump in, then you kind of get the feel with what's truly the problem, or how truly are we going to make this work? You know, like what glue, what's the special glue that's going to allow us to progress forward? And initially, sometimes you can only go in with what you would like. But then once you kind of get in there, you kind of understand what else that's, you know, kind of under the table that has to be addressed. So I'm glad that you're kind of educating, you know, the public on, you know, how that takes place in that, you know, sometimes decisions aren't always permanent. Just depends on what is going on at that moment.
Could be interesting to see. I don't know how the composition of the board changing, what will happen going forward too, right? Like I think some of it is the dynamic of the folks that are on the board too. So
yeah. How can the board be accessible to the community, to specific community groups?
So I think that it's really important to be a willing listener and be an active listener. You know, talking about minority groups, it's really important to activate, like to get myself active in groups to listen, and to be an open participant, to seek feedback, to attend events, to just be out in the community and ready to hear and receive what's working, what's not working, you know, what would be wonderful if it could change or could happen for the school district. So I think that's really important, to know the perspectives of folks, especially in the minority groups. And so to me, that looks like going and attending and being active.
Do you feel like there is a lot of opportunity to do that, you know, to participate in minority events, or do you feel like there's lack of knowledge of where to start, you know, when it comes to, you know, addressing the minority population? I hope I'm saying that right.
Like feeling like I know where to go or where to gain accessibility. Yeah, I mean, I do have certain areas where I feel like I understand where I can go or where I have gone in the past. For example, reaching out to folks who I know are active in the community, who are in the minority group, to say, where can I gain perspective, friends or you know, colleagues that I know, to ask them as well. Something that's really great, I think, here. So at my day job, something that I really like about our organization is that we're very active. We're seeking knowledge. We're asking for feedback from our staff members. We have a DEI committee. We have an LGBTQ plus affirming committee, and I'm working on our staff getting engaged with a program called Inclusive Excellence in the Ozarks. So just trying our best to be good listeners and engage our staff. So at Foster Adopt Connect, something that's kind of I don't know, great about us is our ability to be good listeners and to want to work to be anti-racist. So we actually have an anti-racist statement that we put out about a month ago. As an organization, we have, you know, a disproportionate number of kids who come into foster care are minority children. And so we see that as a problem. We can understand the source of that, and we want to be a solution for that as well. And so we speak out about it. We also have a disproportionate number of youth in the LGBTQ plus community who are in the foster care system or who find themselves unstably housed. And so even in my kind of professional realm, that's something that we're working to constantly learn and grow and expand not only our knowledge, but then what can our actions look like. So I think it's really important for a board member of the largest district in the state of Missouri for education to also be out there seeking that information and working toward that inclusivity and understanding, because you know, as a white woman, I haven't seen all of the I personally haven't experienced everything that a person of color has experienced, but I want to know, I want to be understanding of it. I want to be able to help work toward equity for everybody.
Absolutely. And also, you know, there's, you know, I just want to throw in there, you know, there's always that dynamic of who to approach who, you know, who approaches who, and, you know, who's going to be comfortable, you know, triggering up that conversation and in a way that's going to be, you know, kind of productive. I'm sorry, I got some allergies. You know, that's going to be productive. And sometimes, you know, and the reason why I brought that up, you know, being Springfield, you know, it used to be only about 5% minority at one point. Well, it used to be like our past is full of minority history. However, you know, if you speed it up, you know, the dynamic here is only about, you know, was about at one point, it was about 5% minorities, you know, and then, you know, as we develop, I think we're up to like 12-13%, somewhere in there.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not a statistical person, so don't quote me on that, but it's somewhere between 10 and 14%, I believe. So, and so that means that, you know, it's growing, but it being so small, you know, it's really easy to be disconnected and, you know, from each other, and, you know, the minority kind of, you know, grow itself, and they're trying to connect with each other and trying to grow in the community. And then there's, okay, now how do we integrate into the majority, you know, like how do we start connecting and being very much a part of the community in that way. I see that it's much easier, you know, when a community leader of the majority group, you know, comes and reaches out to, you know, the minority population and says, hey, you know, I'm willing to listen and learn, or I'm willing, you know, to help you get in a position to where we can collaborate and help one another. So, you know, it's interesting to me to see how individuals take on that task and, you know, what resources or what route they prefer to go to do it.
Yeah.
What is the role of schools in teaching children about topics such as sex, education, cyber safety, AIDS, wellness, and bullying?
That's a lot of topics, but my personal stance as a mother is very similar to the stance that I take to my spot if I were elected as a member of the board, is I want children to have the opportunity for that education at their school. All of the topics that you talked about, so sex and AIDS, cyber security, bullying. I may have missed something. What was that? So I feel like that's a really important area for our children, because our parents are not always experts at cybersecurity or experts on how to talk about bullying or how to talk about sex or AIDS even. You know, AIDS for so long was so misunderstood, and I don't feel like we as a society have even fully made it understandable, right? Or like totally taken away some of the stigma around it. And I have a family member with HIV, and they have lived with it for, like, how old am I? 20 plus years, successfully with medication. And it's never progressed any further. And we're grateful for that. So, you know, there's a lot that goes into each of those discussions. And to assume that parents are experts in those fields is a lot to ask of parents. So making it available, this is the way I kind of talk about it, is we need to make it available to our kids in public education. And if our parents don't want our children to have one of those subjects taught to them, we can send a flyer home. I know for my son, he had flyers sent home for sex ed, and I signed off for him to have that education. He was in a 4th grade, 5th grade split one year, and then he was in 5th grade the next year. And so that flyer came home both years. And I said, yes, give him that education, because knowledge is power. And I want him to learn it from curriculum, from evidence-based curriculum. And then if he has questions with me or with my husband or a grandparent, whoever, he can talk to us openly about those questions that he has, but it helps him gain that knowledge quicker than me assuming that I somehow have like an internal curriculum schedule in my brain to talk to him about topics.
Right.
So,
yeah.
You know?
Yeah, because the conversation, I mean, all of these conversations are hard.
Mm-hmm.
And within themselves, like, I mean, there are different topics and there's different nuances, on each topic, and, how do you address a child? And if anything, the fact that they have resources to assist you with whatever you have to say to your, we have our own personal sometimes agendas with our children, and that's well known, and that's okay. But at the same time, they are still living a life outside of you, and especially as a working parent, you may instruct your child to do these minimal things, but then they have these massive questions about things that you haven't been exposed to. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, well, how do we address that? And how do we equip the child, to have the tools to make the decisions and be informed for themselves whenever you're not around.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, I've had experience with all of those categories with my son, my oldest, because he's there, he's ready to have those conversations. And we've learned a lot. And in cybersecurity, we've learned how to put better controls on devices and things. And but I'm glad he's had a lot of between us and his school, he's had a lot of education that's helped keep him safe in situations. So.
Yeah. My view as a parent, it's better to have more tools available to a child than to not equip them at all. Because, you run into a situation and your parent was not there in order to instruct you. And then it's kind of like the community kind of has failed that child. Mm-hmm. I really believe in it takes a village, and that we as a community should act like a village to one another. Like if your child was around me and they had a question, I'm not going to just say, oh, that's totally up to your mom. If I have a perspective, I think it's my responsibility to share with that child, my perspective, because they wouldn't be asking if they felt comfortable, if they didn't feel comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
Or as well, just, I know I've seen in the community, like I went to different events or different things that are happening, and I saw like groups of children that seem as if they just have lack of they have lack of knowledge, they have lack of there's no resources for them, or, there's just not someone telling them that things are available for them, mm-hmm. so that they can make the best of decisions for themselves. And some of, and I've spoken to them, and a lot of them, what they have said was that they may have had some type of hiccup with their parent. And they pulled away from the parent, but they've also pulled away from the knowledge that they depended on.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, okay, now you need to lean on someone else so that you can move forward. Do you agree? Or, I mean, I'm not telling you.
No, I think it's important that we make, at least as far as the curriculum is involved, we make that available and then let parents, you know, opt out if that's something that we can do. You know, I know they already do it for sex ed. I know they already, I think when they do talk about STIs, they also send home something because that's a separate conversation that they have. But yeah, they're engaging parents, and I don't know any teachers who don't want parents more involved in the classroom, or, you know, every teacher we've ever encountered, they're always available or communicative with us in whatever way. You know, they'll ask, can I email you? Can I call you? Can I, you know, what's the best format? And I make myself available when they are, because I know they work on tight schedules. So yeah.
Parents are really important. I'm not saying, you know, that they should be like,
no, I get it.
But, you know, being able to inquire, you know, what does the parent want? And then also, you know, supplementing with where children are lacking and get that knowledge is it's kind of nice to have it available. And like you said, you know, if you're not wanting to engage in that, you know, having the opportunity to have your say as well in what your children is being exposed to, it helps everyone, you know, as a whole, as a community. Let's see. So this is a big topic that's been going on for a while, and so we just want to address it. What is CRT, and how do we approach it?
Okay, so critical race theory is, as I'll kind of tell two pieces of it. So it's like a graduate level study, right? It's a theory that's discussed about racism in our country, about racism in our communities, but it is not something that's being utilized in our public schools, in our K through 12s. So everyone seems to have a different definition of what they think it is or what they're told it is, and I know it scares people, especially certain populations of people. And you know, what we're doing in our school district, I'm sure you've looked at documentation that's kind of floated around online, is what we're actually doing is diversity, equity, and inclusion training, which is completely different from, I think, what's scaring people. And so what our school district is doing is trying to prepare our educators to be the best that they can, to help them understand the circumstances that kids are coming from, whether, you know, that could be a child who is in foster care. It could be understanding a child who's under-resourced, who, you know, is coming from a family who's unstably housed, or who has food insecurity concerns, or, you know, they're going through a crisis of some form. It's understanding our children who are in the LGBTQ plus community. It's understanding our BIPOC community kids. So what it is it's actually teaching our educators to be empathetic. It's teaching our educators to understand how to work with students. And it's not scary or dangerous. So I think what's happened, well, I know what's happened is there's a movement nationally. If you've ever listened to a podcast called Have You Heard? It's wonderful. And it talks about public education, and there are two co-hosts on the show. And one's kind of like really, really great at the education side, and the other's a historian. And so they have this fun like play back and forth with each other, but they talk about a lot of topics. And this is one of the topics that has been a hot button topic for about a year and a half. And it is sweeping the nation. It's not just Missouri or Springfield, it's nationwide. Yeah, that it's specific topics, specific legislation that's being pushed into communities and or states that is trying to create, you know, scare and separation. And it's sad that it's happening. And I don't know how we can make a change to help it, to stop it. But that's what we need right now, is we need that to stop.
I think I think, when doing some research and trying to figure out, what the issue was, whenever, you bring up CRT, all of the things that I saw, or the comments that were made, usually went to, they're teaching your children, your white children, to feel like, they are the abusers, or they are, they are to be feared, or they have more than everyone else, so we shouldn't contribute to them. How do how do we get how do you think that we got to that point with, with the message of CRT, and exactly what's the truth? What do you feel like the truth is, and how do you explain the diversity, equity, inclusion methods that are happening in our small community versus what people are kind of struggling with, based on the national, widespread concerns that are out there? And I'm trying to put this I'm trying to, like, make sure that you understand, like, the question. So I hope I put that. If you didn't understand, then just ask me again. So
yeah, I'm trying, like, can you rephrase that? Because when I heard you, I'm still not necessarily getting it, I think, what you're asking.
Okay. So what I'm asking is that, how do we address the concerns that people are saying, that CRT, or diversity, equity, inclusion, as trigger word, like people are saying that they're trigger words, are an attack on white children.
Okay. How do we address that aspect?
Yeah.
Okay. Now I'm with you. I'm sorry. So what I talked to a group a week or so ago about that too. They were like, well, what do we do? How do we help? How do we make change here? And I think what we need to do as a district is to continue to have conversations around it, to help demystify it, to create absolute transparency with it, and to help people understand that we are not trying to create making white kids feel guilty. That's not what's happening. And that, that the hardest part of all of this is that there is a population of people that exist across the country, that no matter how we come at this, they will still get defensive. And so the hardest part is getting their defenses to come down and getting them to listen, and to listen with open ears, to be critical thinkers about it, to really understand what's being said, and to believe it, and not to think that it's, a lie, or so that's the hard part. I really do. So again, this is happening nationally, and I've been looking like, what's the solution? What do we do? And, as one human being, I don't know if I can come up with the solution, but I do think as a district, we can continue to have conversations around it, and talk about openly, not that we aren't being open about it, but like address it head on. Here's what we're doing for our educators, and here are the myths, and how do we break them down? Now, what does that look like? That's not a board member's decision. That's Dr. Lathan. That's Dr. Lathan's team. She's got an awesome communications team, right? And so that's not something we as board members can do on a strategic front, but I think that those suggestions can be made as a board to say, this is going to continue to happen until, until we can take it to where people feel like we're being transparent, which I don't think the school district isn't being transparent about it. I think they have trainings all the time for their educators, and they don't tell us about them, right? Yeah. And we don't necessarily want to know about them or need to know about them all the time. I think this one came about into public eye when a couple of educators who went through some of the training for the district had the lawsuit.
Yeah.
Right. And so with that lawsuit, I know that has prevented our board members and our district from being able to speak publicly about a lot of topics surrounding it. So that's also a layer of complication that we're encountering as a community when there's a legal issue surrounding the mythical curriculum.
And on the opposite side, and I have a few more questions, just a few more questions here. On the opposite side, because I noticed that a lot of these questions surrounding CRT is always the it's more focused in on, the attack on the white child, or, what they're putting in our schools. But we never really focus in on the opposite side, the one
Yeah.
that it's affected, the Black child, and how they feel undermined or feel that maybe their history is not going to be taught, or that they have to lose, education about themselves in order to attune to someone else. What do we say to those children, those families, when it comes to this topic,
Yeah.
in the spring, in our community?
Yeah. So, I mean, gosh, that is deep. That is like a very, so I think what I'll say first is my belief system. And my belief system is that children should be able to see leaders that look like them. They should be able to hear leaders that sound like them. They should have representation, and know that just, it hasn't even been that long since, Disney finally had characters that weren't only white. On TV shows or movies, or now there are incredible resources for books to ensure that you have representation in your books that your children are reading within the school district, or that people have in their home for their foster children. So like my foster boys I've had 2 and now I have 1, so that they can all see kids that look like them and understand that they can be whatever they want to be. And just because maybe, they don't see that representation. So I think representation is incredibly important. And I think our kids need to know that, that equity is important, right? So how we help those students in the district is, I think we continue to work towards equitable education, and we continue to work towards equitable representation of leaders, of educators in the classroom, of counselors, of nurses, of administrators who represent kids of every background, so that those children see leaders that look like them. And we continue as a society to fight for that representation and for that history to be taught, to not be held back. And so some of that, is going to be at the state level, and working against, there are House bills right now. So a lot of that too is advocating and having a voice in our state, and speaking up to our representation, our legislators, and telling them we don't support, that. We don't want that legislation to pass. So it's local, and local is incredibly important, but it's also state. And so we have to kind of fight in both areas. And then, as a district, I feel like I'm seeing so much growth in the representation, right, and diversity of our leaders. And I hope that we'll continue to see that. We'll continue to see diversity in our educators in the classroom level, because it's great that we have diversity in the administrative level, but our kids don't see that every day. So, right, like they want to see their teacher that looks like them. They want to see.
They want to see their programs and activities, include them and look like them as well, or look like a variety of people, not just them, they want to see, like their friends and themselves and in it. so that they can be connected.
Yeah.
Thank you for answering that question. I know that that topic is really hot right now, and it's not an easy thing to navigate. So I appreciate you keying in on that. What do you see as the major issues facing our school district in public education specifically?
So things we haven't necessarily talked about. This will be interesting to see it go forward. I know there's some candidates currently who are running who were not happy with the last bond issue to improve our facilities. And I'm not sure how they feel about the upcoming, potential of another bond. I froze. Did I freeze on you?
Okay, so sorry, we had froze a little bit. So the question that we were working on is, what are the issues, outside of the things that we have talked about, that you see as major issues facing our school district in public education?
So a couple of things that we haven't talked about are our facilities. I sat on the Friends of SPS, and that group worked toward just better understanding, working to advocate for the passing of Proposition S, which was the last bond issue in 2019, that helped us basically create new facilities, update facilities, add safe entrances to all of the buildings. And so with that assessment, there was a group that got together to make that assessment on the front end of that. And so they also had basically a phase 2 and potentially a phase 3 of work that would need to be done. So there are additional bond issues that might come up. I think that that's important that we continue to ensure that our facilities are safe, that our facilities are accessible to our students, and they are creating healthy environments. I mentioned my kids, the elementary school that they go to is on phase 2. But the girls' bathroom floods when it rains. There are bats in the building. It has problems, and it did. It didn't make phase 1, and so my kids probably won't be there by the time phase 2 happens. But I hope for the future children that phase 2 does happen someday, and that building is improved upon, and it's actually set to be rebuilt, which. Whatever. So that's for people with construction background to make those decisions. Right. But I really do think that our facilities can continue to see improvements to ensure that there's accessibility for our children, individuals with disabilities, that there's wheelchair accessibility, that again, safety concerns are resolved, those types of things. Additionally, I think our district, we're potentially facing a mass exodus of teachers. You look at the pandemic, you look at the behavioral issues that have come since the pandemic has started, and we've been kind of back in classrooms. And you look at all of the things that are coming at our teachers now with just the buzz topics, right? And so there's a lot of stress placed on them. So ensuring that we can retain teachers, that we can pay them better, that we can recruit new teachers when needed, and that we can have a great workforce, and hopefully those who are tenured teachers who have that, that stay. We really want them to stay. So I think those are some issues that we're going to be looking at in the next year or two, maybe 3 if you consider the next bond issue. But we definitely have a lot in this next term that will be happening that will need to be decided to ensure that we can keep the school district moving in the right direction.
Right, absolutely. How does the school board balance the need to provide a quality education with the need to respond to the local taxpayer burden?
The local taxpayer, what?
Burdens.
Burdens, okay. So you're saying like, how to have a good school district, but the taxpayer, you mean the concerns of taxpayers?
Yeah.
It's like, wait a second. So, it's really important that we listen. And I think for the most part, when you hear concerns, complaints, barriers that you're learning about, gaps that you're learning about in the district, they, from taxpayers, they all kind of equate back into a higher quality of learning for our kids. And so it's important that we listen to all folks, whether they have a kid in the district or they don't have a kid in the district, meaning, they might be a grandparent or they might not have kids, but they still benefit from our school district. Yeah. I think it's important that we keep all folks engaged in our education, that we keep them engaged in voting for our Board of Education, because our public education creates our future. It really, these kids, they're graduating, hopefully they're engaged citizens, hopefully they're voting, hopefully they're, working in our workforce, and they don't all leave us. And, we want to retain great talent here. So, it's important that we hear out everyone and at least take into consideration their concerns when making decisions.
And that leads us to our last couple of questions. As a board member, where would you look to make budget cuts if you wanted to make them, and then or increase, the budget? And then also, how do you determine those budget priorities?
So for me, I'll start from budget priorities. It's always important because you have to balance out that budget. So it's always important to look at what is closest to the educational opportunity for our students, and go out from there. So when I'm looking at where we might need more funding or where we might want to cut funding, I would be looking to put funding into the areas that are closest to making an impact on our students. And when I want to cut funding, I would look for things that are the farthest from that impact on our students. So that could be, looking at third-party vendors for cuts, ensuring that we have the best possible negotiated rates on those third-party vendors or, products that we're purchasing. But it's something that I would never want to have a direct impact on our students and direct impact on our educators. And so ensuring that, again, like I said, I want our educators to make a livable wage. Right now, we're 50th in the country for our starting salary for educators in the state of Missouri, and that's just terrible. And then if you layer that with the community focus report this year coming out to say that we have the highest cost of living in the state of Missouri. So we're sort of putting ourselves in a really bad place with how our educators are being paid and then hoping they're going to stay with us. So we can't cut our salaries for our teachers and our paras and our nurses and
our best resource. I mean, even as a parent, I mean, you have the responsibility of providing for your household. And so, if someone came into your household and said, hey, we have to cut that down, you're going to think about how that's going to affect your whole family. And so as a school entity, that's the same thing. We're cutting down on teachers. If we do that, then that's going to affect the students that we care about. And then, our hands are kind of tied at that point. So, the priority needs to be where things actually happen, which is those teachers. And so, United Community Change, like we said, we're focused on being diverse and inclusive, showing where equity can improve in the community. And as community leader, I would like for, to ask you, what do you say to the minority community as a candidate, for this position? And, why do they need to get out and vote? And why should they vote for you?
Okay. I am a firm believer that it's important to vote in every single election that's made possible to you.
Yes.
So it wasn't that long ago that women were given the right to vote, and then even less time since minorities were given the right to vote. So we can't let that opportunity pass us by. It's important that we voice our opinions and that we are at least studying up on who we're voting for, but get out there and vote because it's so important. We would never want to let that opportunity be erased from our history, right? That we have that chance. So why me? You know, I'm empathetic. I'm a good listener. I'm a great just human being. I'll take into consideration, you know, folks' opinions. And I want to be a voice for all of our kids. And to me, that's incredibly important. I don't want a, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this exactly, but I don't want a loud vocal group to come in and make changes that affect all of our kids, that make it impossible for all of our children to have that equitable opportunity at education. I can't even talk.
It's a tongue twister, isn't it?
So, anyway, I think that's it. I don't have like great buzzwords to tell you to say why to vote for me, but I'm a normal person. You can vote.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for being so genuine. I'm sorry, I got something in my eye. But you know, being so genuine, just being you, a mother, you know, a mother who's taking care of her children and her adopted children and understand, you know, the community that we're in, came back to try to make a change. So, you know, I appreciate you like sharing with that. We don't always need buzzwords and, you know, things that, you know, make us look better. Sometimes we just need the knowledge, you know, like, what do you represent, you know? And that's really what people need, you know, just the knowledge, you know, without the, you know, shining stars and all these other things that kind of distract us from the real issues. So I want to just let everyone know that, you know, I am not advocating for any of our candidates, you know, and I am interviewing all of them mostly the same questions. And, you know, Brandi, I appreciate you taking and responding to my message in order to get in front of the minority community, you know, and taking on that opportunity in order to speak directly to the tools or the knowledge that they may have needed that you shared with us today. And so are there any other questions that you have or anything else that I may not have asked you that you wanted to share with the community as a whole, you know, not just the minority community, but with the community as a whole as it pertains to the Springfield public school system?
I can't think of anything in particular that I want to add that I haven't already said. So no, I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming to our Empower Conversation, Unite Community Change. And I look forward to actually meeting you and maybe sitting down and talking about other issues once either you're on the board or even outside in another position. So I really enjoyed this conversation with you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.